you kids, ladies and gents, I'm sorry, I know some of you are my senior. So, been another great stay, as it always is. I know I always say that, but I really mean it. Every stay at Gettysburg is a great one for me. Sorry about the lighting. Still here in the Super 8. Which again, I really recommend. You cannot ask for more from a budget hotel. Oh, by the way, I'm doing a little advertising. Check out the shirt. It's actually not from Hollabog. It's from McCutcheon's, which is in Frederick, Maryland. Not to get things mixed up. Hollabog is up in Biglersville. McCutcheon's is in Frederick. And let me see. You got Boggers in Westminster. So there are three of your biggest orchards / fruit suppliers / produce stores in the, we'll say, the northern Maryland, South Central PA area. And of course I got my maple latte. I'm just kind of ramble just a little bit, guys, and do some recapping. So let's see, lately we covered we went back to Culp's Hill, if you'll remember. And it was nice to be back to Culp's Hill because I haven't been back to Culp's Hill in a little bit. And I made mention of the fact that, sorry, the tripod just doesn't want to stay put on the bed. Go figure. I made mention that the question of why didn't Ewell take Culp's Hill is another one of those questions of Gettysburg, or what ifs of the Battle of Gettysburg. So I already addressed that, and I'll try to remember to link that. In the course edition, we had the question of why didn't Ewell attack Cemetery Hill on day one, which is an even bigger and more controversial question. And I've already addressed that, and hopefully I'll link that too. I'm not crazy about that video, but I guess I did okay. You know, a lot of in all these battles, and in many Civil War battles, and other battles that weren't in the Civil War, you know, it's a blame game, of course, as many of you know or might have guessed. You know, everybody wants to point the finger. Everybody is posing for posterity after the war and writing their books and writing their memoirs and their own accounts. Of course, these generally agree with each other, but there are often quite often some differences of opinion as to you know, who gets credit for what and who's to blame for what, right? I'll maybe just briefly recap Cemetery Hill. It was later in the afternoon. While it's true that the rebels had momentum, they also you know, were quite expended. You know, a lot of the troops were roughed up and burned out, and you know, there were some other troops available. However, I don't think I mentioned this in the video that I did on Cemetery Hill and Ewell. There were some other fresh brigades that were available and that were close enough to make the attack. However, it wasn't Ewell who couldn't or wouldn't send them. It was Robert E. Lee. And so much emphasis, as you can guess, is always given on, you know, commanders and generals of different degree. You know, of course, the lower the better, right? Because we're not going to step on toes of the big guys, let alone the top dog. Getting back to Robert E. Lee, Much has been said about him, and I think he's just a great study. Um, I invite people who haven't really looked into Robert E. Lee a whole lot, his actions and his thinking and strategies, to look into it. I've defended him quite a bit, and I believe rightly so. Not because I'm pro-Confederate, but because he was a great general with his back to the wall. Again, he knew the time was not on his side. He knew that the Union had the resources, the manpower, and the industrial base that he did not. And again, much has been said about that. Um, but when it came to Gettysburg, it was a slightly different situation because he wasn't quite himself. He wasn't his characteristic normal self. In writings and books on Robert E. Lee, he is often described as aggressive, um, because again of what I just described, because of the nature of the lopsided nature of the Civil War in general. And he was very well aware of that at all times, and that did have a lot to do with his thinking, but uh, more so, I mean, his inherent personality, um, others have described over and over again with one word, and that's combative. And he was a fighter. He was a soldier's soldier, or a soldier's general. He was never afraid to stand up to the fight and to take the fight to the enemy, regardless of the circumstances. And some people would say, to a fault. However, that's not quite the case in Gettysburg, because going back to Cemetery Hill, he did have fresh brigades that he could have thrown Ewell in the charge at Cemetery Hill. But, first of all, they still had troops coming in that were on the way, as did the Union. But he did have a few fresh brigades that he could have put in, and he did not. He chose to hold them in reserve. So thinking again about this overall situation at Cemetery Hill, and as well as Culp's Hill and many other decisions in Gettysburg, why was Lee actually uncharacteristically cautious and defensive? The answer, guys, I've already told you about. I've already addressed in some videos, just a little bit back. That's because in Gettysburg he was blind. He was blind. He was out without his eyes and ears. Jeb had still not arrived. So during the whole course, you have to keep in mind, during the whole course of day one and pretty much all of day two, he did not have a bead on the enemy. He did not know exactly where the mass of Meade's forces were at any given time. He did not know exactly when certain corps were arriving on the scene, right? So going into any certain part of the Battle of Gettysburg, he wasn't sure if he was only fighting the troops in front of him, or if there were other fresh divisions or corps coming in right behind. And that's a real issue. You got to think about it, and again, put yourself in these people's shoes. If you were Lee and you were blind, you had no cavalry, right? You had no good bead on exactly which parts of the Union Army were, and where and when which parts of the Union Army were arriving, and from what direction. Your decision making may have been a bit on the cautious side too. I don't have much time left, but check it out, a bookmark from Banham. Quickly, ultimately, however, primary responsibility for the Confederates not pressing the offensive after 4 o'clock on day one, I guess, rested with Lee. Typically, he had granted Ewell discretion, but when the subordinate requested support for an assault on Cemetery Hill, Lee withheld it. He must have concurred in Powell's judgment that the divisions of Henry Heath and Dorsey Pender, blah, 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 blah. The evidence describes a reluctant Lee. With sounds of battle clearly audible to the east, blah, 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 General Lee replied that there was no mistake made, and explained that his army was not all up, that he was ignorant as to the force of the enemy in the front. So, those of you who are perhaps overly critical of General Lee in his actions, or think of him as kind of stupid or ignorant or too aggressive in the Battle of Gettysburg, I think should take these things into consideration. Anyhow, guys, I'm out of time, and I'm here early in the morning, so we will see you on the next one.